Hi, I'm Faith Curammeng.
And I'm Stacie Williams. We're going to talk about organizational culture. So organizations, much like any group of people, have a culture. And it's made up by the interactions, conversations people have with each other. And we can look at it as kind of a set of values, norms, or those are like the assumptions we have about how we behave. And artifacts. Artifacts is kind of a weird one for people sometimes. So,
Because it sounds like you're going into a museum.
Yeah.
I'm going to go see some artifacts, but almost every place you go has some sort of artifacts. And basically, say for example, if you were going to walk into a school, you might see desks, you might see chairs, basic things that you would like. And even looking at the paintings on the wall or the color of the wall, do people in this place have a uniform? How are they dressed? Just different things like that, I think, mean artifacts. So it's not just those dusty things you might have at a museum.
So if we know that culture develops over time, why is it important to learn about an organizational culture, particularly if you're new to the organization?
Well, because I think when you learn more about the culture that you're going to be a part of, or the organization's culture, then you can see how you fit within the puzzle. So when I'm trying to get a job, I kind of want to know what the culture is going to be like. So in the interview process, I ask them some questions that let me know how friendly people are. Like, do people go out after the work is
Wait, do you
over?
ever ask?
I
How
do.
friendly are your people here?
Yes.
And
I
is
say it
anybody
direct-
honest?
No, I just kind of gauge, I'll specify the questions that I ask, and I guess I could just straight up ask them, how friendly are you? But I think asking things like, do people hang out outside of work, or is that something that's frowned upon? Because certain places you're not necessarily able to do those things, or it is frowned upon. So getting happy hour after work might not be something that they do. And then I'd consider, is that the culture that I want to be a part of? So
if you got the job.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yay, you got the job. And you've been at the organization for a month. So you've started to acclimate a little bit. What do you do to keep learning about the organization's culture? Like, how do you go a little bit deeper than some of those superficial things?
Well, after getting comfortable with this new environment and maybe even becoming friends with people, or just seeing who the leaders are and who I can actually ask, I'll straight up ask, because that's what a communication person does. And then I like to see how the power and the dynamics are, what's at play, and I'll just ask them questions to find out what it's really about.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point about power within organizations. That's a big piece of understanding the organization's culture. What's the, in the technical terms, power distance that we have? Like, is your boss's door actually open for you to stop by anytime? Or is that more of a nice thing to say, but not really, stop by anytime with your ideas? I mean, those are all things you start to learn that through a lot of observation too. Really, the importance of listening to how other people talk, the stories they tell about the organization starts to give you a lot of insight. I once worked at an organization that had a little bit of a communication climate of stress. We were overworked in a lot of ways, but it had gone on like that for a while, and there were a lot of narratives about people who used to work there who were very stressed out, and that story about how stressed out former employees were, and people's names who I never met those people, but I knew them on a first name basis, really started to tell the story of this place kind of having a culture where that's kind of what's been going on for a while, and it's set us on a trajectory. And so it's interesting to hear how people tell the stories of former employees, or even things that they do, like whether they get together or have happy hour, any of those things. That really helps us understand a lot more about how things really work, because there's a formal structure, there's the organizational chart, and that can tell us a lot, but the informal structure is really where a lot of the culture is built, of how we understand how we do things. Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. So let's think about this in practical terms.
Yes, most of you who are watching this are probably PCC students, and many of you may have experienced what it's like, but if you're new to PCC, you've just enrolled, can you tell us a little bit about the PCC culture and what it might be like to enter a college classroom for the first time?
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to college. I went to community college also, and I didn't know what to do. Like you show up at class, but what else happens? I guess you take notes, you try to pay attention, turn your homework in on time. But even the question of how do I address my professor? Do I call them professor? Do I call them Mr., Miss, or whomever, so-and-so? First name basis. There's a lot of awkwardness around some of those initial interactions. And then how do you interact with your peers? Like, are we supposed to be pals the way I might have been with the people I went to school with before in like K-12, or are these people who are more like my coworkers, right? There's this kind of awkwardness between what kind of relationship we have. And I think every classroom has its own microculture then, because every group of people that comes together starts to develop habits of how we do things. I think one of my funniest, or the ones that I like the most, is when people will say, "You're sitting in my seat." Like nobody's name is written on it. But if you look, the first day of class, people sit in one spot and then they tend to go back to those seats over and over again. We develop a norm. Like, this is how things happen in this room. This is where I sit. Right? And so you can kind of start to look at how those rhythms and patterns develop as well to learn a lot more about the culture. So if I were to give advice to somebody showing up in an organization for the first time, it would be spend a lot of time listening and observing, because you can learn a lot through the stories people tell, through the interactions you observe, and just really through your own interactions with people, being mindful of them and monitoring them tells you a lot. So, you have anything else to add about organizational culture?
No, I mean, we can you can take a whole entire class on organizational culture, but we're just kind of just hitting the surface spot right now. And so I think we got some basics down.
Yeah, like maybe 101 minus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.